Hi friends, Teen Librarian Rayan here, and I am going to explain how this week's craft works. So, as you guys will have seen from your kit, you got two different colors of embroidery floss and two safety pins. I just have one right now because I'm just making one project. So I'm going to give a short video explaining how this project is supposed to work. So you will have already seen a picture of my finished product. So this is one that I made with all the different patterns that I included in your kit. You do not have to make all of them. You can only use one. You could pick two, whatever you want to do. Whatever you decide to make with your project is completely up to you. But this is what your potential finished project will look like. So I'm going to set that off to the side for right now. So the first thing you're going to want to do is decide which of your colors out of the two that you were given is going to be the background and which one is the design. So you guys can see in mine, I chose red for my background and white is the color that I use for each of my designs. And I'm going to do the same thing with this project that I'm going to be making right now. So what I'm going to want to do is take my design string, so for me that's white, and I want to cut 4 pieces of that design color, and I've already done this, so I already did this right here, but for this step you are going to need a pair of scissors, so make sure you have a pair of scissors. You're going to want to cut these strings so that they are about 2 to 3 feet in length. You're going to have some extra left over, but I like cutting more than I need just so that I can be comfortable in knowing that I will have enough and I won't have to stop my project halfway through. So you can see I've already cut my strings. Here they are, my 4 white strings. So now what I'm going to want to do is I need to attach these strings to my safety pin. So I'm going to actually open my safety pin up because you want to make sure to attach them to the side that does not open. So I'm going to leave my safety pin open just so that I can see which side is which, and I'm going to actually put my extra white string off to the side for this because I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to take my first string, match up the edges right like that, and then I have a loop at the end now, so right here. So I am going to make what's called a cow hitch knot to attach these loops. So since my safety pin is open, it's going to be a little bit easier, but I want to slide the loop behind and put my ends through that loop and then pull it tight, right like that. And as you can see, my string is now attached to my safety pin. So we're going to want to do this for each of our design strings. And then lastly, we are going to do it with our background color. So you might think it's a little strange that we have 4 different strings for our design and only 1 for our background, because that's typically not how this works. If it's the background, it's going to be in the back, and we're not going to need more than just 1 string. But we're actually going to end up tying most of our knots with only 1 string of our background string, and that's how we get the background or the red part of my design. So I know this might seem a little bit strange that we have so much white and not as much red, but I promise you this is what we want it to look like. So I'm almost done with these cow hitch knots, and then all of my design strings will be attached. And so it doesn't matter which side of your project your background string ends up on, but I prefer to start to the left. So I'm going to assume that you are going to be starting to the left as well. And you can see on this side, my cow hitch knots look like this, and then if I flip them around, they look a little bit different. So you can decide which side you think looks better, and that will be the front of your project, but it doesn't really matter. I actually think that this side looks a little bit better, so when I attach my red string, I'm going to attach it over here so that when I flip it over, it'll be on the left-hand side. So now what you're going to want to do, I'm going to lay this out flat. So you can see I have all my strings. They're almost the same length, so that's pretty good. So I want to have about the same length of my red string. So what I want to do is I want to very carefully start pulling on this loose end. I don't want to unravel my entire skein here because this is actually going to make it a little bit easier when you're working with your project. So I'm going to measure it up right like this, and I'm going to make a fold right about here so that I have a loop just like I did with the other strings, and then I'm going to make sure, because I want this end, the end that's still attached to the skein, to be all the way on the left hand side of my project. But remember, I'm flipping mine over, so I want to flip this like that so that my skein is on the, for this it's on the far right, but it will be the left once I turn it around. So I want to attach my cow hitch knot right here on the end, just like I did before. And the last one, it's a little tricky because you are going to have to pull the whole skein through that loop. So I'm going to make my loop a little bit bigger, right like this, and then put both the end and the skein back through like this. So you can see it's a little tricky. I'm getting a little tangled up right now, but that's okay. I'll get it figured out. So you got a little stuck on that open end there, but like I said, it's all good. There we go. So now I have all of my strings attached to my safety pin. And now I'm going to close my safety pin up because I don't want to poke myself as I continue my project. And I'm going to flip it over right like that. And as you can see, I have my strings attached. I have of my 5 strings attached. They've turned into 10 because they're all looped over and doubled over. And so that is what you want your project to look like before you start doing anything else. So now I'm going to take a piece of tape. So you are going to want to get some tape so I can attach my project to the table that I'm working on. That way it won't slide around as I'm working. And so I can't really tape too much of it because I do need to see those knots. So I might pull it out just by accident a couple times, but that's okay. You could also pin the actual safety pin to the leg of your pants if you wanted to have it right on your lap while you're working. But just bear in mind that if you do that, you're going to want to make sure you're wearing nice thick pants. I've actually ripped leggings before because I pulled too hard while I was working on a project. So make sure you're wearing jeans or sweatpants, something like that. Not leggings or pajama bottoms or other thin pants like that. So as you can see, I kind of separated out my strings just like that to give myself a better idea of how they all fit together and what order they go in. So we're going to be tying, the next step we're going to go to, so you can see I'm pulling a little more string out of my skein, so I have a little more to work with. We're going to start with our skein string over here. That's what I'm going to call this. And we are going to want to make a row of knots across this entire row of all of my other strings. So if you've made friendship bracelets before, you've probably done something like this. If you're making like a stripe pattern or something like that, you will be making knots all the way across with one string. So the way you're going to do this, and this might be a little hard to see because I know both of my strings are the same color, so I'm going to demonstrate on these 2 red strings, and then I'll do it again on the white string so you can see a little bit better. So what I want to do is I want to take my skein string, and as you can see, it's over top of everything else. I want to make a 4. So see how I'm making a 4 like this? So my skein string right here is on top of my first red string right here. And you want to make sure it stays on top here, but you're going to tuck it under like this and pull it through. So I made a little loop right here. You're going to pull that loop all the way up to the top and pull it tight. And that is 1 knot. We actually want to do this twice. So I'm going to make that 4 again, tuck it under like this, and pull it up right like this to make a double knot. If you don't make those double knots, your project can start to unravel on you. The knots can start to twist in a way that you don't want them to. So just make sure to remember to tie those double knots. And the knot that I just made is a left to right knot because this is the skein string over here. It's now on the right hand side of this red string and it started to the left. So that is what is called a left to right knot. So I'm going to demonstrate again on my first white string here because you'll be a little bit better able to see what I'm doing since the strings are a different color. So I want to make that 4 again like this and then tuck it under here and pull it up to the top so that it's nice and tight. And then I want to do it again to make that double knot. So we make the 4, tuck it under right here so you have that little loop and pull it up right like that. So now you guys can see I have 2 knots right here on my first red string and then my first white string. And I want to keep going until I am all the way across. So I'm going to be making knots on every single one of these strings right here. And you guys don't have to make me watch me make all of those knots. I'm gonna pause here and I'm gonna come back to you once I've reached the other side, okay? So as you can see, I have finished my first row of knots. I went all the way across making double knots, left to right knots all the way. And as you guys can see, my skein string right here is starting to twist on itself a little bit. This will probably happen to you as you're working on your project. It's nothing to worry about. This is completely normal. The best way to get rid of that is to detach your project from your work surface and just kind of hang it on its own in the air, and the string will untwist itself as it hangs in the air. So totally normal, very easy to fix. I'm not going to worry about that right now though. So now that I've reached the right hand side of my project, I actually want to go back towards the left hand side. So I want to make a row of knots with the same skein string right here going from right to left. So as you can imagine, we're going to do pretty much the same thing we just did, except in reverse. So I'm going to start with this string that's on the far right hand side, and what we're going to do is we're going to make that 4 again, but you'll notice it's going in the opposite direction, so backwards 4. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to tuck it under this string right here. You're going to make that little loop right like that, and then pull it up to the top. And then we're going to do it again, because remember, we want to make those double knots. So we're going to make that 4. You can see it's a little tricky now that it's trying to twist it on itself, but that's okay. And then tuck it under here, and then pull it tight, right like that. And as you can see, I have another knot. And there's a little bit of a bump at the end, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be completely flat. And so that is the first knot. I'm going to keep going all the way back down again, and continue making knots as I go. So I did want to, while I'm doing this, explain why you guys are going to want to keep this string here attached to the skein. You can see I even have the little paper holders still on it. I think mine's starting to tangle a little bit, but that's all right. The reason I like to do it this way is because if you unravel the entire skein and you're working with a whole skein's worth of string, it can get tangled really easily. I mean, you guys can see mine's kind of already getting a little tangled. And I just find it's a lot easier if you keep it wrapped up the way it was when you got it. And that will keep it from tangling. It'll make it a little bit easier to work with as well. There's less to pull through every time you're making your knots, so it'll just help your project move along a little bit quicker. I might actually have to take my skein apart and unravel it completely, unfortunately, because you can see right here I'm starting to get a little bit of a tangle right there, but that's all right. All right, so I'm going to pause now again, and I will check back in with you guys once I've gotten all the way back over to the left-hand side. All right, so I made it back to the left-hand side. Here I am. So these 2 rows, they're just a background color. They're the same color all the way across. We didn't really do anything special with those. I normally put those rows there just because I find it makes the rest of the project a little bit neater and easier to work on. But if you would rather just start right on the get-go with your design, you can do that and skip these 2 rows. So I'm going to bring my the pin that I made earlier back in for a little bit. So we are going to make just the heart on this pin here. So as you can see, the heart has the same amount of knots going across as my project down here does. And I am going to want to, now that I'm on the 3rd row, the first row of the heart, I need to make 2 knots that are red, 2 that are white, then 1 red, 2 white, and 2 more red. So red would be background and white would be design. So I need to make some different knots going forward. So I'm going to start this first row of my pattern by making those 2 background knots, and these are going to be knots going left to right again. See, we're all the way on the left hand side, so we're going to start with this red string right here, and we're going to make those 4s again, and we're going to go up like this and make those double knots. So you'll notice that the first string here is red and red. And the reason we're able to have a red thread there is because the design doesn't go all the way to the outside. We will always have a red knot at the very beginning. of our rows. If you made a design of your own that has a white knot, you would need to then tie a white thread in place of the red thread. And then you just have to tie a single white thread and a single red thread instead of doing those cow's hitch knots. So I made my two left to right background knots right here. So now I need to make the first of my design knots. So I'm going to find, here is my white thread that comes next. So the white thread is actually going to make a knot on top of the skein thread, but we still want our project to be going towards the right. So we need to make the white thread end up on the left hand side. So we're going to be making a right to left knot with the white thread. So you can see I'm making that backwards 4 since I'm going in the opposite direction, and I'm going to make a knot using my white thread. And so there's my first one, and remember we always tie double knots, so make that 4 again, tuck it under, and pull it nice and tight. You might have to pull these knots a little bit tighter than normal, just because, as you can see, they're going in the opposite direction, so they'll want to kind of fall down and not stay in line with everything else. So you might need to tie these ones a little tighter than the other ones and pull them a couple times to make sure they stay nice and tight. But now, as you can see, I have one white knot right there. So for our heart, we need another white knot. So I'm going to make another right to left knot again, making my backwards 4 and pulling this up right like that. You can see my whole project tried to turn itself around there for a second, and pull nice and tight, and there we go. I have my 2 white knots right there. And then I want a red knot now, because this is going to be the very center of my project. I don't need another white knot just yet, so I'm going to go back to what I was doing before. I'm going to make those left to right knots on the next design string, right like this. So there we go. So you guys can see I now have 2 background knots, 2 design knots, and 1 background knot right there. So now I need the next part of my heart, the top of the other half of my heart. So I'm going to find my next string, and again I'm going to make those right to left knots instead of those left to right ones. So we're going to try to pull this one tight a little bit. You can see my project again, it's trying to kind of turn over on itself, but don't worry about that, totally normal. We want to pull it nice and tight, and there we go. We have another white knot right there, another design knot. And then we're going to keep going and do the same thing over here. So we're going to do the backwards 4 again. Here we go, and pull it nice and tight like this. There are my 2 knots there. All right, and then for the last part, we're going to go back to using our skein string right here, and we're going to make those normal left to right knots. And so that is how you're going to start your design, making it appear in your project. So one thing I did want to mention is if you haven't done this type of project before and you're pulling your knots really, really tight, you may find that after a while your fingers are going to start to hurt. It's almost like sometimes when people are just learning how to play the guitar or the ukulele, the pads of their fingers start to hurt because they're not used to that kind of pressure being put on them. And so just like that, if you're not used to tying a lot of knots like this, you might find that it might not happen till after you're all done. The insides of your thumbs right here under your nail might start to hurt a little bit, but that's completely normal. It's just because your body isn't used to doing this kind of thing. So you guys can see right here, I have made the very first line of my design. So see, it looks very similar to what I made before right here. And so we're going to move on to the next line of the design. So right here, you can see the heart now needs only 1 of the red background knots, and then 7 white ones all the way across, and then the next red one. So I'm going to show you guys this one as well, because you'll notice we have now gone from left to right. We're going to go right to left again, which means instead of the white thread making the right to left knots, now our background color is going to start making those right to left knots because we want to go back this way again. So I'm going to make that 4 again, going the other way, and I'm going to tie my double knot right like this. And again, there will be a little bit of a bump on the end since I did 2 knots of the same string in the row, but that's totally fine. And then I'm going to pull it nice and tight. And there you can see I made my first knot again. And so now we want to make those knots using our white string to get that second row. So I'm going to find the first white string here. I'm going to pull this one a little tighter. And we're going to make, it's a little tricky right now. There we go. We're going to make that 4. So see how it's going the opposite way? I'm going to tuck it under and then pull it nice and tight. Whoop. You can see my knot wanted to kind of disappear inside the other one, but that's okay. All right, I'll do it again. Oops. All my strings kind of want to go together. There we go. And so now I have another white design knot right there. And I'm going to keep going across because I want this string to keep going across. So I'm going to find my next one. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make another knot right there. And again, you can see I have to pull it kind of tight to get it to stay up where it belongs. And there we go. I have the next one right there. And I'm going to keep going all the way across until I've made it all the way back. So I'm going to pause here again, and I'm going to check back in with you once I have completed my entire heart design. All right, guys, so as you can see, I'm all done. I did move my tape so that I could have a little bit more of a secure hold on it. And I made 2 rows of just the background red color right at the end, just so that my heart is right in the middle, because I think it looks a little bit neater that way, but you guys don't have to do it that way if you don't like the way that this looks. So now I'm going to show you guys how to finish off your project, because even though you just tied all of these knots, if you were to just cut all these strings off, some of those knots might start to unravel, they might slide off, and then your whole project would unravel, and that would not be fun. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take maybe 2 or 3 of your strings, group them together, and you're going to want to tie all of those strings together. So you guys can see we have kind of a, here we go. So I could tie each of these 2 together maybe. I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do, 3. So I'm going to do 3 over here, 4 in the middle, and then 3 off to the side. And I'm just going to tie a regular old knot and pull it, try to pull it up nice and close to the end of my project here. It's a little hard to see what I'm doing, but see how I have a little knot there now? And that'll just prevent my project from coming apart. So there's one, and then let's do another one. Again, these are just regular knots like you would tie pretty much anything. So nothing special to be found there. There's 2, and then let's tie these off for 3. You guys can see I lost part of the other one of my paper holders on my skein while I was doing this. It fell off, but that's okay. Did not impact my project at all. This one's a little tricky since I have the whole skein that needs to come on through. There we go. Let's just pull my knot, make it so that it's right down there on the end of my project. Oh, come on. This one's being a little difficult. There we go. There. So now I have 3 knots right like that. You can, if you want your knots to be a little bit smaller and tighter, you can pull on each individual string after you have tied your knot to make them just a little bit more secure so that nothing happens to them. I think I'm going to go back through and do that with each of mine, just again to make sure that they're not going to untie themselves. And then we're going to just trim off the extra string that we have. You can leave it as long as you want. If you like how it looks like this with all those strings hanging off, you can just go ahead and leave it right like that. I think I like it when the strings are a little bit shorter, so I think I'm gonna cut mine to right about there. So let me get my scissors. These aren't the best scissors, but that's all right. So I'm gonna just go across right like that. And now I have these 3 little tassels at the bottom. So you guys will notice it looks a little bit different than this one. What I did with this one is I actually braided the ends together and then tied a little knot at the end of the braid and trimmed my edges that way. So there are a couple different ways you could end your pin, your project, however you want to do it. So these are just 2 different ways to do it. You could also maybe do a big braid with all of them. You could keep tying some more friendship bracelet knots so that it comes to like a little point maybe, however you guys want to finish off your project. And then you can decide who you're going to give it to. So since I made a heart right here, the heart pattern is a wish of love and compassion. So I would think, who's a person that I might want to have a little bit of extra love right now? Or maybe I'll just keep it for myself, because couldn't we all use a little extra love right now? But I think this one is going to be a gift from my mom. And you guys can pass it on to whoever you want or keep them for yourself. And obviously my two are very different that I made. The only thing that's similar is that both of them have a heart on them. So you guys can make yours however you want. You can make your own pattern if you don't like the patterns that I gave you. But I hope you guys have fun making this. So have fun and happy making.